So you're currently on a book and screening tour, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
How's that going? What's the reaction to the film?
The reaction to the film has been great. It's kind of amazing to me that it plays so well to so many different kinds of audiences, but it does, and it's partly thanks to Carolyn Parker, who's quite a personality, but mostly I think due to Jonathan Demme, who makes a movie that works, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're going around on your tour. I think it's a 9-city tour, but you're also discussing your companion book, The Fight for Home. But when you talk to the people out there, what is the general feeling about Katrina? Because we, in the midst of a crisis, like Haiti or what have you,
right.
There's that initial kind of flood of concern and compassion, but then the news cycle kind of ignores it after a while. And so what is the feeling out there of the consciousness of?
Yeah, I've been kind of amazed that when Jonathan and I went down, which was 5 months after the flood, our friends told us at the time, you're too late. Katrina fatigue has set in, and people won't pay attention. And it was, as those of us who remember that it was front page news, and we were all watching on TV for a week or whatever it was, and then it kind of disappeared. But in fact, what Jonathan and I found was that there was this amazing story about recovery and people coming back that brought us back down to New Orleans for 5 years of shooting and now some 500 hours of footage. And the lack of fatigue then, to my mind anyway, has continued. That is, people remain interested. They kind of go, wait a second, I don't know what's happened since. Tell me about it. Jonathan and I both, feel that this was a crossroads, how America dealt with Katrina, and the jury's still out a little bit, so folks are still interested.
Yeah, well, it's a remarkable film, and I definitely want to get into discussions on the film with you. But
sure.
First of all, this is your second collaboration with Mr. Demme, is it?
Mm-hmm.
How did it happen that you guys got together?
Jonathan and I are neighbors and have raised
wow.
our children together, essentially. Our children are buddies. And there was a day when we were actually walking our 2 sons to elementary school when we had gotten the news that Jean Dominique, who was a mutual friend, a guy from Haiti who ran a radio station, had been assassinated. Mm-hmm. And as we walked back and tried to figure out what we could do, it was one of those events that you wanted to, jump in a plane and do something. We kind of both realized that the thing to do probably was to try to tell the story, which is what we do. And so that's how we began making a movie called The Agronomist. Mm-hmm. And I think it was 5 years later that documentary happened. And Jonathan always has 100 projects going at once. And eventually when Katrina happened, we both sort of looked at each other and had the same feeling, what are we going to do? And it took us a little while to get organized, but eventually we got ourselves down to New Orleans just to look around. I mean, Jonathan says that he planned to shoot the 4 seasons, so go down 4 times, and then have a little something that was YouTube-y or something real small. But we got totally hooked and concerned about the people and ended up, as I say, going down. I mean, we're still going down. We're trying not to still shoot, but we're still going down.
Well, I think of the differences that have to exist between a book form and film. And obviously, yeah. I think probably in film you could paint a more intimate portrait, and books allow you to kind of breathe more and take in more of the subject.
Absolutely right.
Is that what you found?
Yeah, I mean, The Fight for Home, the book I wrote, puts Carolyn Parker, who is the subject of this movie, in a much bigger context, and not just who else is in her neighborhood, but what was happening to the lower ninth and what was happening in New Orleans in a way that if you did it, I think in a movie, everyone would fall asleep. Now, they may fall asleep reading my book, too, but I don't have to watch them falling asleep when that happens, like you do in a movie theater. In fact, what's exciting about the film, what a book can't do as well, I think, is as you said, the immediacy, the kind of look at who she is, look at how she talks, look at how she moves, look at the landscape she's in, that you can do in an instant in a movie, and it's incredibly sexy and captivating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the real strength, I think, of the movie. And now, having said that, I hope the book is a little sexy, and I know the movie succeeds in putting her in some context as well.
Yeah. Well, she's an absolute force of nature.
Something else.
She really is. And do you find, though, that her kind of resilience and spirit is indicative of the remainder of the people in New Orleans that you've come across?
Yeah. So here's the plan for your viewers and listeners out there. The plan is that we will make 5 movies about the recovery in New Orleans. And we have kind of made 2. One of them is called New Home Movies from the Lower Ninth Ward, which is a sort of overview of lots of the characters we met. And it comes out of 5 evenings we did for Tavis Smiley on PBS. Mm-hmm. We kind of took those 5 shows and edited some and added some, came up with this. The second one is this movie about Carolyn Parker. The next one, I hope, is going to be about the Harrison family, which is a family down there that has a really rich vein of New Orleans culture. World-class saxophone player, Mardi Gras Indian ties. So it's kind of going to be a story about not just coming back to New Orleans, but what New Orleans means culturally. There's another movie, we hope, about a guy called Pastor Mel, who is as extraordinary as Carolyn, I think, in a different way, a born-again ex-crackhead who runs a ministry down in New Orleans. And the final one is, I think, going to be about the part of town known as Back of Town, where Brad Pitt ended up building his houses in New Orleans, and where a bunch of very interesting characters pass through on the way to that final building. So, I hope there are 5 movies, and then, we dream that someday we will get the reality TV show to end all reality TV shows, which will be actually following all of these characters and how they interconnect, a treme that's real.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah, and, so all we need is a network just to hand over an enormous block of time, and we're all ready to go.
Yeah, well, I do wish you the very best of luck with that. I mean, they sound like remarkable portraits, and I mean, that brings me to one question I was going to ask, because you said that you find yourself continually going back to New Orleans and capturing more footage. I mean, in the process of putting together Carolyn's story in particular, was it difficult to gauge when you got everything you needed to get, when you told her story fully, or you just had to let it go and abandon it and say, this is done, we've got it?
Our vow to ourselves and to the people we got to know down there was we would film until they got back in their house. So, we thought that was going to be a year or 2. We assumed that it couldn't take much longer than that. And in Carolyn's case, it took over 5 years. So we knew the moment the ending had come when she was actually in her house, as you see in this film, talking with her kids around a table. We thought, okay, she's in her house. And then it was a question of going back into the hours of footage and trying to figure out how best to tell the story of how she got there.
Yeah. Well, there's obviously the arc that we see in the film, but where are we in New Orleans today? What are the main goals that still need to be accomplished there?
Well, it's an odd situation. It's the people like Carolyn are back in her neighborhood. It's sort of every other house has somebody in it, so it's a kind of a ghost town in a way. She still gets in a taxi or on a bus to go get her groceries 20 minutes away because there's no grocery store anywhere in her neighborhood. Police protection is still very iffy. There's still no health care around there. She still has to go a long way for that. So, but a bunch of that stuff, was pre-existing as well. Flood or no flood, it was a neighborhood that had been neglected. So what you see is a New Orleans that's begun to recover, but, the hope was it was going to be a better New Orleans, and I think that's still the hope, and it's still Carolyn's hope, but we haven't really, really seen that yet. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that when you speak to people about what's going on today in New Orleans, a question that probably pops up is, what can I do to assist and to help?
Mm-hmm.
And
the answer is very complicated because the same way Jonathan and I decided what we could do best was what we did best, which is make movies and write. I think that tends to be the case for other people. If you say to yourself, well, what I do best is interview people about films, then what I could do to help New Orleans is get a bunch more interviews about New Orleans-based films to help that industry going. If what you do is paint houses, try to get down there and paint a few houses to help people out. I think each to their ability, as we say. But there certainly is the need to help. And, I think the larger implications, let me backtrack a little bit. When we were making this movie and it came time to do the soundtrack for it, essentially, Jonathan said, this is an international issue. I'm not going to just do the New Orleans music we all might expect, the Fats Domino and Louis Armstrong and that stuff. He said, that's going to make it feel too local. It's in fact an international, larger issue about how we deal with people who don't have all the things I just listed, health care, police protection, that kind of stuff, and how Carolyn somehow, amazingly, surmounts it. So I think those issues are lots of places, and if you want to help on those issues, you can probably go next door. You know what I mean? You can go somewhere in your own city and do some work as well as in New Orleans.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the film production, and I mean, I personally have noticed a lot more productions going on there in terms of film.
Absolutely, it's a growth industry down in New Orleans, which is a good thing. I mean, they need whatever they can get in terms of business, and the key is to also employ some people from New Orleans as part of it. And I think Treme, for example, has been great about that. They've actually given jobs to a bunch of people from both production jobs and acting jobs.
Absolutely, and a stunning show. I mean, it's one of the greatest.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you mentioned. You said that there are lots of empty houses. There'll be one occupied and then one empty, and on and on. Are these just families that never moved back?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases. So in Caroline's case, the house right next to her, when people see the movies, they will understand this. But the house right next to her is still empty. It's where a woman died in the flood, who was mistaken for Carolyn. So for a month or so, Carolyn was reported as being dead. Now, that house was an older couple, and nobody's gotten back into it except termites, as far as I can tell, and they're doing quite a good job on it. So that's really hard for her to live next to a place that's falling down. I'll tell you a quick story. Across the street is an old elementary school, which nothing has been done on and could be the centerpiece of this little neighborhood. It turns out that the not-for-profit that owns the elementary school is controlled by the local councilman, who was taking the FEMA money to rebuild that structure and putting it in his campaign. And he just got indicted a month ago. So that kind of stuff is holding back all the development, on top of just the difficulty of starting all over again.
All the corruption still exists there.
Still exists, yeah.
So tell me what it is about New Orleans, the spirit of New Orleans that keeps you invested and coming back. Well,
anybody who hears this who's been to New Orleans doesn't need me to explain. It is, we ran into a woman one day outside of Carolyn's who had been gone for a year and a half after the flood, and we said, "What did you miss?" And she just did a list. There was no punctuation even. She just went, kind of crab cakes, gumbo, music, architecture. I mean, she just ran through this list of stuff that's great about New Orleans. And it's a unique American city that way. It's, for one thing, very Caribbean, which is interesting. Jonathan and I had this shared interest in Haiti, and New Orleans feels a little like Haiti. It's the one American city, maybe some of Florida, but New Orleans really feels like, it's part of that Caribbean, South American nexus as much as it is North American. And people tell great stories. I mean, Carolyn isn't alone in that, but she's a great example of it.
Oh yeah, some of the great characters, and honestly, just like you said, some of the great art that we've had emanate from New Orleans. So it's a vital city. But we are a filmmaking show, obviously, so we all kind of idolize the works of Jonathan Demme. In your opinion, what kind of characterizes his uniqueness as a director?
Well, it depends on what sort of level we're talking. I mean, one of the things that he exhibited to me that I didn't understand as well about him before was this incredible patience in making a movie. So he went down and shot himself, which was the first time he had ever done that, actually, which I didn't know. So when he started fumbling with the buttons and stuff, I said, "What's up, Jonathan?" And he went, "Oh, I've never done this before." But there he was shooting his little video camera, and he got better and better at it. But once he started, he was, as long as someone wanted to talk or show us something, he was willing to film. And that sounds easy, and in fact, it's very hard. As a writer, I kept wanting to interrupt and ask questions and speed it up or change directions, and he's just willing to let the scene go and go and go, and then do the editing in the editing room. And it's an amazing ability, it turns out, and we got great stuff. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to interrupt and go, "But Carolyn, what about this?" And because he told me essentially to shut up, I waited, and she eventually got to whatever my question was. It would just come, but it would come in the flow of what she was saying.
Right.
Then, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the documentary form, and this is probably something unique to documentaries, it's such a living thing, and it kind of defines what it's going to be as you're doing it. Right.
We had sponsors. We were trying to get some money ahead of time, but by the way, we never did. This was all our money. But we were trying to get sponsors ahead of time who said, "Sure, we'd love to back this. It's Jonathan Demme. It's great. Just what's the ending?" And we said, "We have no idea what the ending is. Until it happens, we can't tell." And they said, "Oh, well, we can't give you money for that because we don't know how it's going to turn out." So that is the challenge of a documentary is, like I said, we had this kind of structure where we knew it was from when we got down there to when they got back in their home, but we had no idea what path that would take to get there.